I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit? I hope you're having a good and successful week. We could not do this show without your viewership and listenership and overall support. You have helped me build quite organically a wonderful community of people who truly care about the work that they do becoming a wonderful part of a bigger day that's also suffused with wonderful things to do. That's a work fit. And I appreciate you joining us on this journey. We've been at it now 3 years. We are starting now our 4th season, and we could not be more excited. We're changing things up a little bit. As some of you know who are familiar with our format, we were typically live. I did live shows. And this season, we're going to try something different. We're actually pre-recording shows to run during our fall season. The benefit is that I can bring on more guests who have busy schedules. I can also bring on guests like we have today who are in different parts of the world. And so I am not requiring them to be on a live show at what might be 12 o'clock midnight their time. So all in all, this is going to help us expand our experience set for our viewers and listeners, but also our guests. So I appreciate the journey that you are taking with me on What's Your Work Fit. Before we get to our guests, let me just say that if you aren't already, you can engage with What's Your Work Fit on the platform or platforms of your choice. We are on 2. We are on LinkedIn. And you can go to What's Your Work Fit to our page there and click follow. You can also subscribe to our What's Your Work Fit YouTube page and look for that black oval that says subscribe. And that way you will be apprised of all new shows that come down the pike and also our clips that we take from our shows and other important content. Next up, join our Substack. This is something that we created a few months ago, and I'm very excited about it. It is like a video newspaper for What's Your Work Fit. In this one place, you can connect with live and pre-recorded shows. You can watch video clips from our programming. You can listen to the audio podcast. You can also go to the archive and look at past shows and stories. And of course, you can just go through here and read the stories that we post weekly. It's fun. So far, so good. And you can subscribe to it at dansmolin.substack.com. Join us in the conversation there. One last thing, and if you haven't done so already, please tell 5 of your friends to subscribe to What's Your Work Fit on the platform or platforms of their choice. That's how we're going to build this community. And again, thank you for being a part of this wild, rollicking ride we called What's Your Work Fit. I am so happy to introduce to you from Cape Town, South Africa, our guest today, Jillian Reilly. How are you, Jillian?
I'm great, Dan, and I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, we are excited for you to be here as well. As I said before we hit record today, you are our first guest from the African continent, so that's terribly exciting.
Exciting for me too. Although not born in South Africa, I've lived here long enough to feel like I'm from here in many, many ways. So I'm happy that I can be the first guest of yours to represent the African continent.
So let's get to it. Jill is, or I should say, she has had experience being an executive coach, helping executives and companies navigate disruptive and profound change. And she has been an aid worker on the front lines of HIV/AIDS. And she is also the author of 2 books, including her latest, which is called The 10 Permissions, Redefining Rules of Adulting in the 21st Century, which hits booksellers this month. Here's a copy of the cover. Very, very nice. Congratulations on that, Jill.
Thank you. I'm thrilled. It's on its way out into the world.
Well, before we get to the book, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about your origins. You are not from South Africa originally. You are from the Midwest United States.
I am.
I'm wondering if you could share with our audience the intentional move that you took to leave the comforts of home in Middle America and go to a faraway place called South Africa.
Yeah, no, it was 1993. Well before many of your listeners will have ever even been alive, but yeah, feels like a long time ago now. But 1993, I was at Northwestern University. I kind of had this vague sense that I wanted to be a part of something meaningful. I wanted to figure out what my best contribution to the world would be. My parents thought I was going to go to law school. I was kind of interested in human rights law, but I had this longing to one, see the world, and to, yeah, to be a part of something potentially bigger than me that I thought would have a beneficial effect on the world. And it so happened that South Africa was going through this incredible transformation, preparing for the 1994 elections that would see the end of apartheid, Nelson Mandela coming into power. And for reasons I can't completely explain, I sort of decided that I wanted to get to South Africa, and that rather than going to law school, I was going to take this rather large leap and get myself over here. And I confused, and I will say disappointed, my parents, the people closest to me, because I went totally, off piste from what they were expecting. But I had a really deep sense of calling, and one of the things I talk a lot about is that, a lot of times you can't make sense of those things. They're
Right.
some of your deepest drivers are not things that are always going to make sense or be absolutely clear or be easily sort of communicatable. And so, yeah, I listened to this inner voice, and it took me on a wonderful, wonderful journey in my life.
That is just dazzling. And I can relate to some degree to the parental disappointment. Our
Mm,
parents are probably from the same generation. Uh, Work was what you did, and it wasn't supposed to be fun, but it was supposed to be remunerative and give you the life that
right.
you needed to live the American dream. And so you took the other path. You took a path that was really suffused to your own purpose, if you will. And
Oh yeah.
you actually probably laid the groundwork for this second book because you gave yourself permission to live the life and lead the life that you hoped that you would one day lead. I want to get to our lead question, and it comes from one of our regular viewers, Lisa. Thank you so much for writing in, Lisa. She writes that, and you're going to love this, Jill. She writes that her career mentor, who she likes very much, often states with great authority things like, quote unquote, "This is how your career and life will unfold. And if I were you, I'd line up the following things to do next." And Lisa
Mm,
writes, "I know that this is sometimes what mentors feel obliged to do and to say, perhaps to use their own successful career histories to inform their mentees. But she says, it feels like I need her permission. So her question to you is, do I need permission for career success? So let's get her started. Let's get Lisa started, Jill. Does she need permission?
Yeah, no. I think you know what my answer is going to be, Dan. I mean, I think, increasingly, that listening to your own voice, that leaning into your own agency and personal authority is becoming ever more critical in a world where we are every day and will only continue to reevaluate and redefine success in a hugely fluid world that is promising to kind of break open even further in the coming years, where our career paths will no longer look linear and predictable. The kind of jobs we might hold, we can't even say what they are right now.
Right.
So, I think that permission that each one of us has to give ourselves is especially relevant right now when, if I were somebody's mentor, my advice to them would simply be to kind of really develop their own capability to navigate a fluid world, as opposed to thinking that I could hand out a set of prescribed steps for them to follow. Um, I describe it as sort of finding your own way as opposed to following a prescribed way. And I think the way that you sort of begin to permit yourself to find that success is to accept the fact that there isn't anybody out there that can tell you what your path is. And that's not a bad thing. It might leave you in the first instance feeling like, you want somebody to give you the answer, you want somebody to point you in the right direction. And sure, there will be people who might contribute to your own thinking. But I think we're being called upon right now to lean into our own sense of what we want, of how we're going to start to pursue it. And that's probably one of the biggest shifts that I think we're having to kind of navigate at this precise moment.
I think you're familiar with a little bit of my backstory. So,
Mm,
first part of my career was kind of a traditional executive in advertising and marketing. I say traditional because that was a job category for many years before I even entered it. And then I
mm,
got into headhunting, 20 years of that. And that's in the headhunting part, in the executive recruiting part. I got especially familiar with the angst of young people. I spoke
mm,
often at college career events to help them gain a perspective of what hiring managers are looking for and what recruiters are looking for. And I was deeply moved, if not troubled, by a trend I saw, which was these young people thinking that they had to seek permission to be successful. What do you think
mm,
I should do? Where should I
mhm.
go? How should I spend my time? Do you
Yep,
think I would look okay in this?
right.
To the point where I think many of these folks who were really smart were addled with added anxiety, probably a lot
Mm,
of depression,
yeah,
and an obsession with perfection. And
yes.
I just want to add one more point to this, and this is informed by having a child of my own who went
Mm,
through both private and public schooling. And one of the conversations I would hear, especially as she got into high school, was don't fall behind.
mm,
Be involved in everything. Fill out your day. Be
yeah,
involved in every club. Do the things now that are going to be important to a career. And this is before they even started filling out college applications.
right, right.
So, Jill, it's not surprising that we're at this moment that you are now relating to, where people were like, what do I do? Where do
Right.
I go?
Yeah,
I got to think about the future. Everybody's telling me about the future.
right.
So get us started. How did you get to this idea that we have to, or I have to put down 10 permissions that will help people liberate themselves of all this baggage, if you will, so that they
Mm,
could lead a more happy and informed life?
yeah. Well, I think it goes back, if I can take us back to that career in the aid world that you talked about, because so much of my own knowledge and experience was born out of being present to people trying to navigate, as you said, very profound change.
Right.
And everything it taught me about what it takes for people to sort of drive their own growth and evolution. I showed up over the course of many years, this young woman with lots of resources, the face of big aid organizations coming
Mm,
into very complex situations saying, hey, I've got the answers for you. Do A,
mm,
B, and C, and let's take the AIDS epidemic, which you referenced, as probably my greatest teacher, if I can call it that. That
mm,
we, the Western world, went in with a simple prescriptions for
mm,
how people could navigate this complex challenge, and guess what? It failed
mm,
because we were not in a position to, give them solutions. What we needed to do was build their capability to kind of navigate the change themselves. And I ended up there feeling like, I can give everybody all the resources, all the tools, all the knowledge, but I can't give them permission to make their own choices and to make different choices, to make the choices that nobody else in their family has made or nobody else expected them to make. That's incredibly hard.
mm,
And in fact, in the face of profound change, what most people do is sort of double down on what they have always done. They sort of retreat into tradition or convention because they think that that's where they're going to find safety. So,
mm.
this theme of personal agency and sort of leaning into your own authority started back then because I realized that there was no outs. I could not be the catalyst that I wanted to be if people didn't give themselves permission to kind of make the choices that I was asking them to make. Flash forward 20 years and a lot of experience in between of again working with corporate leaders. And guess what? Same themes. When your identity is very sort of wrapped up in the status quo, it becomes very hard for you to allow yourself different kinds of choices, new conversation, new ways of behaving.
Mm,
And as we found ourselves sort of approaching, I think, a world post COVID where we are being required to navigate ever faster, ever more profound change, this theme for me felt very relevant, which is, are we going to allow ourselves to make the kinds of choices and changes that we're going to have to make in order to thrive in a very fluid world? Or are we going to hold on to the way that things have always been? Are we going to trust our own instincts and our own voices and allow ourselves to have lives that might look very different from our parents, that might look very different from what we expected, but are actually well suited for the world that we're living in now? So I think this idea of self permission, of personal authority, is absolutely critical when you're trying to navigate change. And right now we are facing, some utterly profound change to the ways that we are going to live and work. So, that's where these 10 permissions came up is like, okay, we need to think about how we're going to do life very differently. And that's going to require each one of us giving ourselves a whole lot of permission.
How do you start this I mean, you wrote the book and folks, it is an easy read. It is adaptable in ways that will surprise you. You can use any page in this book and immediately adapt it to your own purposes. So bravo to you, Jill, on that. But how do you get somebody started on this when they are so wound up um, acting out behaviors that others have told them are important?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I always love to come back to my first permission, which is to be willful. And I think it's so much of relevant to your podcast, because I think that the more you start to tap into your own desire, to your own agency. And in the book and in the workbooks that come along with it, I talk a lot about, um, first of all, you don't have to blow up your life. You don't start by trying to fix big problems or make big change. Work with your life exactly as it is, but start to tune in to some of your own inner voice. I describe it as inside out navigation, as opposed to what
Mm.
you're describing, which is outside in. So
Hmm.
instead of looking around for everybody, whether it's an influencer or a mentor or your best friend, to tell you what they think is right for you, just starting to cultivate a listening in rather than a looking around, for me, is a super, not simple, but it's a first step in beginning to authorize yourself to trust yourself, to believe that some of your own interests and desires and needs are valid and adequate drivers for you in making choices. And in the workbook that comes with the book,
Hmm.
you know, I really say start with very basic things. Start on a Saturday. Start with, you know, what do I want to do today? What do I want to eat? These are so simple, and yet, you know, people kind of sleepwalk through their days. And
Mm.
then they suddenly wake up to the fact that they want to make some sort of profound changes in their lives as it relates to work or relationships or, you know, where they live. And they have no sort of lived experience of driving their own way forward. So I really kind of advocate that people just start super small with some of their everyday choices and start to enliven themselves to their days, before they start to kind of, you know, make big choices and changes in terms of their bigger lives. So um, that agency that you need to build can be built through some of the sort of lowest consequence decisions that you have to make in your life. So, you know, don't start thinking about your capital P purpose if you're not, you know, alive and awake to some of the choices that you make on a daily basis. So I see it as sort of building muscle. Um, you know, and it's like if you were trying to, if you wanted to run a marathon, you wouldn't go out and immediately start running a marathon. You would start to build up a capability. And for me, it sounds very basic, but it's like the capability of making intentional choice
Mm.
that's very much driven by your own sense of self as opposed to the one that the world might have of you. And that's a muscle that you build little by little over the course of time.
In, I think, the shared experience of the industrialized world post World War II, we as a culture valued scale more than anything. Go big. You talk about
Hmm.
this in the book. Go big,
Hmm.
go large, go deep, go far. To somebody who is dealing with stuff in their lives, for somebody who is starting off in their career,
Hmm.
all of those things are unattainable, I think, at least
Yeah.
initially, or
Yeah.
perhaps at all. And
Yeah.
so I like this idea of incremental exploration, because if you don't go deep, if you don't go far, you're
Mm.
putting a toe in the water. You're saying, how does the water feel?
Right. Absolutely.
And see if something could scaffold from there. You know, we talk a
Yeah.
lot on the show about side hustles, and you're
Mm.
probably familiar with the fact that my wife and I have had one of the longest side hustles there is. For over 30 years, we've run a vintage clothing and accessories business. That did not start big. That started accidentally, where my wife was looking for something to do, and she had started off trading fine art, and that was not creating cash flow. And then she sort of incrementally got into trading smaller things, and that got into vintage jewelry, and eventually into fashion and so forth. So we've built this thing that is not our entire lives. It's incremental still,
Mm.
and because it's incremental, I think we feel it's attainable. It's actually cash flow positive. It
Mm.
doesn't rule our lives, but it goes against this notion that you talk about in the book, which, you know, going big sometimes is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, it's the worst thing you can do in that you tie yourself to, you know, a set of expected outcomes that increasingly I think now it's unrealistic. So, not only is it potentially undesirable, and that your big idea from wherever you're sitting
Hmm.
is probably a version of something that already exists, right? Because that's
Right.
the only way that you can have it, is because you're taking a version of something that's already there, and you're, taking it on as your own vision. And I think as we move into a world where what we're going to be called to create might not have existed yet, might be something that we've got to sort of feel our way through and create a new version of something that already exists. That idea that you're going to have a big, clear, 5 year down the road vision of what it is that you're trying to become or create, I think is increasingly unrealistic and undesirable. And yet, people feel if they don't have that, it's a sign either of a failing in their own sort of level of ambition,
Hmm.
um, that somehow they're not, sort of, they're not thinking at scale. And part of what I'm trying to say in the book is that some of the biggest things come unlocked when you allow yourself to kind of find your way through them and adapt and evolve them as you go. So, my message to a lot of the younger people that I'm working with and talking to is that there's nothing wrong with working in shorter time frames, with having a sort of broad, what I call, a big intention, so a general idea of what it is that you want to do or create or become, with what I call small attention. So, it's really sort of being committed to learning in the present tense, adapting and pivoting as you go, with a general sense of where you're trying to go, but not getting tied up on the fact that, you know exactly where you're going to be or what you're going to be doing in 5 years' time. It's not realistic, and I think we need to let young people off the hook from a way of operating that worked fine in a very predictable world.
Right.
But the whole point of the book is that's not the world that we're living in anymore. So if we continue to measure ourselves and set our expectations by that world, then, a lot of us end up feeling like, as you said, we're not where we're supposed to be.
Right.
We're not who we should be. It doesn't feel the way it should be. That's why this whole idea of new rules of adulting, it's like it's going to feel different than maybe what you expected it to do when you're in your mind. It was linear, relatively seamless, accumulative. It's not going to be that. It will likely be, a little bit more iterative. Um, it
Iterative.
it might feel more uncomfortable in the sense that you will be working with a greater number of variables. You will not have as many certainties to play with. Um, and all of that's okay. Like, that's not a sign that somehow you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're moving forward in a hugely fluid world. And, the message of the book is we cannot hold ourselves to a 20th century set of rules that essentially no longer work. But we haven't really allowed ourselves to come up with what would be new rules in a world where, we're on the cusp of corporate life being sort of completely recast. So what's that going to look like, and what's that going to feel like, and how are we going to allow ourselves to adapt our own way of operating for that world, and not
Mhm.
continue to measure ourselves by the old one?
And that's going to be a hard transition. And I was
Very.
part of that old tradition. I helped people ladder scale from one level upward, which doesn't happen anymore. Work has
No.
become more episodic. It's become more um, project driven. I want to talk a little bit about
Yes.
the project driven part of it because I've long believed that modern work and one's success in it would be greatly informed by their ability to start, continue, and complete projects.
Mm,
Now,
mm.
that could be a simple task, or it
Right.
could be something more complicated.
Right.
And the reason why I feel that's important is because more of us are doing work not as sole contributors, but as team members, because
Right.
team ideation is driving more of the work, because teams can better adapt to changing circumstances. Just when you have more people on hand and more people owning particular elements of a greater outcome, there's going to be more of that. So I'm very interested in talking to people who do project management to small or to great degree, and learning about what the rest of their lives look like. And
Yeah.
that's sometimes very interesting, Jill, because you might find somebody who during the day they earn their keep as an accountant. Now, to a lot of people, that could be boring. You're doing the same stuff, working with numbers day in and day out, and you got to do spreadsheets and so forth. It's hard on your eyes. But oftentimes, very smart people doing that kind of work, they recognize they do the work well. It's paying them their living. It may not be fulfilling their worldly purpose, so they get involved in extracurricular things, such as, like, we are running a vintage clothing business, or having a
Right.
photography business, doing portraiture, weddings, and bar mitzvahs and that type of thing, and deriving joy from that, and permission to enjoy from that maybe the big job that they have during their days doesn't provide, other than remuneration. Are
Yeah.
you seeing some of that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I think what I'd love to see, again, using my own language, is for us to give ourselves permission to do that far more intentionally,
Right.
far more. I mean, I don't dare use the word strategically too much, but to be super deliberate about that. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of three things. One is that, I think um, moving forward, people's identity will not be as attached to their role or their profession as it was. So that decoupling of I am doctor, lawyer, teacher,
Mm-hmm.
artist, whatever, is part of what I talk about in the book, is moving from an I am a mentality to an I can mentality.
Mm.
So as opposed to I am an accountant, and that defines my days, it defines my path, it shapes my understanding of what I'm capable of and what's possible for me to create in this world, to a I can do accounts. And as you say, what then opens up for me is when I can do that is one of a number of different things, but also I can apply that knowledge in a variety of different settings depending upon, how the world is evolving and how I'm evolving with it. So, my own sense of what I'm capable of doing becomes more fluid and more adaptable. And obviously, that's the whole kind of point of the book. I then think that the idea that we will be, and I would say this to young people right now from a very early age, building out a portfolio of experiences, projects, as you say, and that's okay. I think we need to maybe consign the side hustle label to
Yeah.
another time, because I think that gives the impression that there's this main thing and then there's this little thing I do on the side. Whereas I would say young people might have, a portfolio of things that they will be doing. I talk about in the book this idea of free agency.
Mm.
So, for some that might conjure up ideas of the, baseball player out looking for a team. But what I see when I talk about that is the individual out looking for ways in which she or he can, in line with your podcast, kind of make their best contribution, figure out the different ways, the different projects, the different
Right.
opportunities for them to kind of co-create something, grow something with other people. And that sort of marketplace that I think you're alluding to, where there might be multitudes of different kinds of projects and different ways of creating value in society, I think will shape our understanding of how we move forward far more than the, you know, linear and fairly fixed identity of, what you think you can do and who you are allowed to be for the bulk of your life.
Well, the idea of a portfolio life is interesting because, yes, we do talk a lot about gig work and side hustles. And oftentimes that is a reaction to what I'm dealing with in my life. Maybe I need the cash, or maybe I just need the distraction. A
Hmm.
portfolio life seems much more intentional. It certainly relates well to people in the Gen Z cohort who are having the most trouble connecting with traditional work. And for
Yeah.
those who have been successful at it, they're going to say, well, I've got these interests. So let me see if I can carve out a way to derive income from several of them and do it
Mm.
simultaneously. And in this country, you can work as an independent contractor and have what's called an LLC, a limited liability corporation, to your name, that enables you to run a business that does multiple and varied things. And that to me is really wonderful because those activities, while they may not necessarily be big money winners, could lead to a really wonderful life. Okay, so you live smaller, you live below your means, you don't do the old school chase after trappings that get you into money trouble. And it's true, a lot of these young folks are in the hole with student loans and things like that. But if they can figure out a way to carve out a life of their choosing, of their desires, that creates income from projects or small business entities, that could be the wave, one of the waves of the future.
Well, I mean, I have two teenage sons, and while I don't think they are necessarily reflective of, everyone in their generation, I certainly observe in them and amongst their friends that attitude already exists within them. I don't think they're under any illusion, as I was, that there is going to be some corporate protector for them for their
Mm.
lives. I think they have lived through adequate amounts of layoffs and upheaval within the corporate world, that
Right.
they are not sort of coming into their careers with the expectation that I did, that they would garner security by attaching themselves to an institution that rewarded them in exchange for their loyalty and hard work, because they have seen firsthand that that is not the case. Which is not to say that they will never work for a corporate, but they will not, I believe, go into it with the same set of expectations that I might have or my generation might have, that, if I play my cards right, I can just hang on to this for as long as I can and, as you said, continue ladder scaling. So I think they already have this sort of, we can call it entrepreneurial, we can call it sort of, multi-potentialite sort of viewpoint, that they will be generating income from a variety of sources. They will probably have more irons in the fire than we ever expected to. I think
Mhm.
how to do that intentionally, how to do that strategically, how it doesn't feel like a sort of patchwork of insecure irons in the fire, is obviously where the learning is, where the growth is. And I think as more and more people do it, and I think as the current sort of corporate offerings to people become fewer and fewer, or at
Yeah.
least take even themselves more of a project base, more of a short term based nature, um, there will be, I think, more opportunities for people to start to kind of learn with and from each other about what does this portfolio career potentially look like? How do you manage it? I was chatting to a woman the other day who's very much involved in this, and she said, one thing to remember is that there's going to be large numbers of people who will all be sort of pursuing these same questions together, trying to kind of work on an alternative to the linear corporate career path. And so that will probably drive a new set of, support services, things coming into being that will enable, I think, that kind of lifestyle, potentially more than we can see from our vantage point right now.
And let's talk about AI, because the very thing that is going to disrupt traditional work is going to be the the lubricant for all of these smaller project-based,
That's right.
what can I do types of things. When I was probably your son's age, I'd go to the career counselor in high school, and without asking me what I was thinking about, would put me through a battery of tests to tell me, Dan, you should probably go to law school. And I'm like, I don't want to go to law school. I hate arguing with people. But now, the way I think AI is going to benefit the newest entrants into the workplace, whether they get traditional jobs or not, is that agentic AI will allow them to deal with perhaps an issue or a problem that they feel that they could in work overcome. Task AI with coming up with something, perhaps even a business model, perhaps even an approach. And within hours, perhaps they could be off and running with a business of their own to mitigate whatever that issue is, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Whereas in our experience growing up, dealing with an issue might have taken years, because first you had to be accredited with a degree in college, and maybe even an advanced degree. And maybe you're still not even sure you're going to get to that point. And oh, by the way, the world changes. So by the time you get to graduation, that opportunity you thought about when you were a kid is probably gone. Well,
Yeah.
now that's happening like daily.
Much quicker. Yeah.
So I all of this makes me wonder, with AI coming in, if, Jill, we can get back to this old notion of dreaming beautiful dreams about what we can be. I'm not even talking about a future focus. I years ago when I started podcasting, one of the questions I asked guests was, the question that the kindergarten teacher would ask all her children, all her charges, which is, close your eyes and imagine for me what you'd like to be when you're a grown up. And for a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old child, they're not thinking, I want to be a dentist. They're thinking, what makes me happy, and how do I see myself being happy? So for the child of a doctor, they might say a doctor because dad really loves his work, or mom really loves the work that she does in healthcare.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for the experience of students internationally, but I can describe what happened over the last 20, 25 years in the United States, whereby those dreams of younger children to be happy, to see themselves enjoying themselves, got crushed by the time they were in middle school. I mean,
that's right.
Obliterated, right?
Yeah.
And why did it get obliterated? Because we were then responding to a national need to raise educational standards. And by doing so, we pushed critical thinking out of the way, and we focused on getting good test scores.
Right.
So the unintended consequence of that is we robbed kids of their ability to dream, and we made them absolutely neurotic about their futures.
Yeah.
My question to you is, do you see an opportunity to get back with granting ourselves permission, also granting ourselves permission to dream again?
Oh, yeah, I do. And there's a phrase that I use a lot these days when I'm talking about the book, is that, you've got to give yourself permission to imagine your adult life differently. And I don't care whether you're 21 or 41 over the next decade, it's going to look and feel different than what your mental model might be for it. And by the way, you get to. So, we're living in this moment where I think the historic exchange that we've been asked to make, which you're alluding to, and that was personal satisfaction was exchanged for financial and social security. So, no, I don't. My dreams of being happy and making meaning and, feeling fulfilled got pushed to the side in favor of get a good job. So that was implicitly the exchange we were told to make. And the world turned on the fact that, and at the same time, this giant category of kind of knowledge work opened up within
Hmm.
the, late 20th century that I think led us to kind of corporatize adolescence and young adulthood even more than it had previously been. So, and I recently wrote a post about living in the glory days of the 80s where it was like everybody wanted to be a consultant or a lawyer. And that was what good looked like. And
Yeah.
it looked good because you were, you had a corner office, you were making a lot of money, and you had social status. Happiness did not come into the conversation. So I think right now, yes, I truly believe, and many people might think it's Pollyanna, but we might not have to make that exchange. We might be able to create security for ourselves and find satisfaction, growth, and meaning because we are not kind of defaulting to ready-made roles that society tells us, are good for us, the dentist, the lawyer, the
Right.
this or the that. We're going to be making some of it up, and I know that that sounds daunting, and I know it sounds like, I am going to have to find my own way to create my own sort of role, to create my own way forward. But in that, I think, as you said, lies this tremendous potential for people to have to ask themselves questions about, well, what is it that I want to be a part of creating?
Yeah.
What do I want to be doing? What do I want to know more about, to learn more about? So I do think that within the current, as I describe in the book, the kind of unraveling of a lot of those ready-made sort of paths and roles that we were taught to just sort of step onto without too much thought, lies the potential for people to get in touch a little bit again with what is it that I want? And that's a fundamental question that I think many previous generations were not allowed to ask themselves and were frankly not told to answer with any degree of sort of feeling. So I think it's a great potential moment for us to kind of marry our desire for, happiness and meaning with, the opportunity to create new value for society and to create security for ourselves.
When we grant ourselves permission to have agency,
Hmm.
what, in your opinion, happens to health, wellness, and well-being?
Well, I mean, you're so much more aligned with what your wants and needs are, and you allow yourself to act on them, right? You allow yourself to answer the question of what do I want instead of looking around for other people to answer that for you. So all of a sudden you're working from a place where you feel like you're responding to your own needs and not trying to satisfy the requirements of your family or your culture or your corporate or whatever it is, which is the exchange that so many people make. They outsource their agency to everything around them in order to fit in order to feel secure. And
Right.
I think when you allow yourself to ask yourself a question of, well, what do I want to do?
Mhm.
What should my next move be? And then you get to answer the question, not as you started out our conversation with looking
Yeah.
around for everybody to tell you what that answer should be. You're working from a place that feels, it might sound woo-woo, but more aligned with, okay. And from that place, you can step out and, even if things aren't going so well, or even if the outcomes aren't exactly what you imagine they would be, it's a far more satisfying experience because at least you know you want it, at least you know it was something that was worthwhile you sort of going after. Whereas if you're always doing something that you think somebody else, wanted you to do, there's you've sort of betrayed a little part of yourself in the process, and it never feels like you're really sort of feeding your own growth, your own identity, your own sense of what you're here for. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I am thinking a lot about resilience because resilience is a goal, if you will, not only in modern work, but also in things such as how we do business. And last summer we had all these horrible weather events where, I mean, people were drowning and communities were being washed away and all of this. And our response to these crises is often more crisis. It's patchwork. It's a Band-Aid approach. And I look to resilience as a goal for how we pursue work ongoing. And I think when we provide ourselves permission, we allow ourselves to find a resilient way to live. Now, what do I mean by that? When I was in corporate, when I was a 31-year-old, 30-year-old executive in an advertising agency with all the trappings, making a great living, having the perimeter office in the building, having staff working for me, I was absolutely miserable because I was chasing after a tiger, if you will. And my health and my wellness took a beating. I was spending a fortune out of pocket at doctor's offices treating my bad back and my chronic sinus infections and whatever else. I did that because I had to basically treat myself for my pursuit of what I thought was happiness.
Right.
Whereas now, if we start intentionally and say, this starts not from an ideal job, but an ideal life and an ideal happiness frame.
Yeah.
I think we actually help ourselves to become more resilient in the world.
Of course. Yeah, I agree with you completely because you're sort of um, you're working from a greater sense of resourcefulness within yourself. You're sort of tapping a broader set of your own capabilities to keep going because you're doing things that you want to do. I mean, every single one of us knows that within the course of our broader lives when you're doing something that you want to do, something that feels good for you, or at least you understand the value in it. You chose it, it's yours. Well, then you're in, right?
Right.
And even if it's hard, or even if you fall down, you get back up again because you want it. When you don't want it, when you fundamentally don't want it, but you're doing it because you think that it's satisfying a set of, requirements external to you, then it slowly saps you and eats away at all of those capabilities to keep going because you're not operating from a place of real desire. And, part of what I talk about in the book is coming into that idea of desire as your greatest driver. And we need more and more of it in a world where we're going to get knocked down more. And I think normalizing that and not spiraling as a result of it, right? I mean, the more that you're, as you've described earlier, working on different things at the same time, the more you're trying things at the same time, there are going to be more ups and downs. There's going to be more learning that takes place where you feel like, oh, this is going to feel hard, quote unquote. And if that for you is feedback that, oh no, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing this, or why does it feel so hard? Life shouldn't be this hard. Then you're going to waste a lot of energy sort of just servicing that, anxiety and confusion around why things look the way they do, instead of going, yeah, well, this is what happens when you are pursuing a number of different things. This is what happens when you're trying to build something new. There's going to be a lot of up and down, but if you want it, it certainly is much easier to ride those ups and downs than it is if you're doing something, for the sake of status or because somebody else told you to.
I think we also have to give ourselves permission to fail because the
Oh,
failures
yeah,
are just huge teaching opportunities. We all knew people growing up and perhaps in our careers that were perfection obsessed. They never learned anything other than they made
yeah,
themselves probably miserable. And
right,
failure is an old time honored thing. I mean, when we had a guild economy, people that were good at crafts, they learned by trial and error. They learned, okay, this didn't
right,
work. Let me try this. This worked. Let's see if I can extend it and do it better. And
yeah.
through test and control, they got better and better and better at what they did. And I'm hopeful, Jill, that we can apply some of that old world uh, knowledge to how we pursue new work that fulfills our dreams, if you will.
Yeah, well, I think once part of the transition that I think we're making right now is accepting the fact that we need to embed learning into our
Right.
lifetimes. That it's not, there's a period of learning early in your adolescence and in your early adulthood, and then you stop learning and you execute on everything that you learned, and that's that.
Right.
Now I think we're moving into a stage where we are going to recognize that our entire careers will be driven by learning embedded into them. And if that is your mindset, if you are embracing and accepting the fact that you're going to have to learn new things all the time and keep sort of upskilling, keep, pivoting in terms of the projects that you're working on, the ways that you're sort of applying your skills, then you're going to have to accept the fact that as part of that learning process, there's going to be quote unquote failures. That a fluid world requires you to
Yeah.
be in a sort of far more consistent beginner mode than it did when you were, just an executive within a corporate or something like that, and you were
Right.
executing on the known and the familiar. Now you're exploring the unknown and the unfamiliar, and within that space, you're gonna trip and fall. You're gonna take a wrong turn. You're gonna, and that's okay because in those spaces you actually accelerate your learning. You find out so much about yourself and about this world that you're entering into, that those are actually really, precious learning opportunities that we don't need to be ashamed of. We don't need to kind of fear. We actually need to embrace them when they're in and when we're in them and say, okay, what have I learned from this and how does it help me sort of with my progress forward?
I love that we're ending on this note. We have to wrap things up, but before we do, and I have one more question to ask you. I'm hoping that you can point our viewers and listeners to you so they can learn more about you, perhaps read your posts, and
Hmm.
get a copy of The 10 Permissions by Jillian Reilly. How would they do that?
Yeah, as you said, Dan, it's on sale on the 16th of this month, on Amazon. They can pre-order it already. It will only be in bookstores on the 16th, but it's available for pre-order now. And as you said, they can find me on LinkedIn, on Substack, on Instagram. I'm out there sort of spreading the permissions word as far and wide as I can at the moment. So, yeah, and also, I'm really kind of keen to talk to people as
Mm.
they make sense of what this means for them and their life with the choices that they're making right now. So I really encourage people to reach out to me to have a conversation about the permissions that they feel they're having to give themselves, and which and of the 10 permissions resonates most for them, depending upon where they are and what they're trying to do. So, yeah, really encouraging your listeners to reach out and get in touch.
Wonderful. Well, let's get to our last question, which is what's your work fit? So, Jill, what attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes the work that you do a wonderful part of your day, doing many other wonderful things and not the all consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit?
I think it's when you feel like you're making your best contribution. Like, no matter what you're doing, and it's whether you're a barista or a doctor, or, if you feel like you are making your best contribution to your workplace, to the people that you're serving, your clients, your customers, the people in the world, I think that's what leads to people feeling satisfied. If they feel like they're not able to do that because, they can't sort of bring their best ideas, they can't bring their whole personalities, they're sort of, shut down in some way, shape, or form, then I think that's what leads to a lot of the frustration. But, you know, bringing your best value add to whatever the situation that you're working in, I think is really what creates that good fit.
I love it. Thank you so much. Jill, stay in the studio just so we can just finish up.
Sure.
Thank you for this experience. It's been a great show.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. I love the conversation and I really appreciate what you're trying to do in terms of driving a different kind of narrative about work in the world and the ways in which it can really sort of benefit us and be a really positive part of our lives.
Well, thanks for that. Everyone, we'll see you next week.